Windbreaks on their own are just rows of trees and or shrubs that reduce the force of the wind. The benefit of doing that is to conserve soil moisture and nutrient loss for agricultural production areas. So that's what a windbreak is for. And it's also for homestead protection. A buffer strip, because the two can be confused, is an area of natural vegetation, whether it's trees, shrubs, mixed species, grass areas, and that's usually along a natural area. And what you're doing in that case is you're protecting that natural area from the adjoining land use, whether it's agricultural fields, crops, grazing, or whatever. So there is a difference between a windbreak and a buffer strip. The question there is, well, what are the benefits of slowing down the speed of wind? And really what it does, it reduces soil moisture loss. To get even more complicated or digging down even further, the loss of soil moisture makes those fine particles within the soil, such as the clay and the silt, not the sand so much, but the clay and the silt, they become airborne. They're blown away by high winds. And what is the importance of those? Those two soil particles are the soil particles that have the greatest capacity to latch onto, to capture, we call that cation exchange capacity, onto nutrients, phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen. In addition to them being sort of the engine of the plants that grow there, or the food, they also have the greatest capacity to attach onto soil moisture, which then feeds the crops. So it's all about reducing the wind and therefore reducing the loss of soil moisture, but it has a domino effect. It's not a complicated technique, that I will say. Having said that, there are a number of conditions that you must evaluate in order to design a technically efficient windbreak. And you must be looking at things like the density of trees within that windbreak, the maximum height of the trees that grow within that windbreak, and the width of the trees that grow within that windbreak, how many rows you want, the length, and then also the species that you put in. You must match the species to the site, and then also the spacing. So those are the factors that you should consider in design, which therefore affect the efficiency, the health, and the longevity. And then there's not part of that question that you answered. There's also how do you establish it, how do you manage it, and how do you replace it? I'll kind of unpack that. So the establishment, which I would go back again to say about conservation authorities, they're very helpful in helping farmers establish windbreaks. But what they're looking for is, what type of soil do I have? What's my soil moisture regime? And now we're going to match the proper species to that site. So so let's take a clay loam with moderate drainage. So a good species for that would be Norway spruce. So now you've selected the proper species, and you may say, and I want a shrub with regards to that on that site to help with the slowing the air movement in the lower part of the tree. So now we've got, say, high bush cranberry. So now we have a 2-row windbreak, and we're planting it 1 meter by 1 meter. So we've established it, and there may have been some site preparation to help with that, whether it's mulch around the trees or herbicide application. And now we're into the management phase of it. And the management phase is maintaining as much live crown, so not dead branches, in the windbreak. And to ensure to do that is you have to thin the windbreak over time so that you maintain those live branches. And of course, then finally, replacement is about replacing the windbreak before it declines. And for those that die naturally from whatever reasons, there's lots of critters and there's lots of bugs out there, that replace them on an ongoing basis. I would say that the management of windbreaks is not a labor-intensive activity or feature, but it does require some work. So those are, in general terms, those are the 3 sort of phases, and therefore inputs that the landowner would have to undertake to maintain a healthy and effective windbreak. So some of the concerns are cost. I think that can be mitigated with the conservation authorities that we have in the area. There's always help around there to reduce the cost. I think there's concerns around design. I think that can also be mitigated with some professional advice. And I think the main thing from an agriculture production perspective is the space that it takes up and takes away from the production of my crop. That's the first one. The second one is the maintenance. And you establish a tree and it grows branches and it takes up more area. So I think it's taken away. How we mitigate that is, what are the advantages of windbreak, in the terms of the long-term effects. It does vary by crop. There are more advantages in using windbreaks for certain crops than others. To give you an example, studies done in the southwestern Ontario showed that the use of windbreaks increased yield production for soybean by 25%. Now, having said that, in terms of spring wheat and oats, it was a much less, in fact, I don't even have the numbers, much less degree increase in production with the use of windbreak. So there is differences with regards to crop too. First of all, the need for windbreaks is when you have large fields, right? So you don't have a natural barrier, a natural wood lot, or a natural fence line that slows the wind down. So that's the need for it. So we'll say years and years ago, your agriculture fields were much smaller because of the availability of equipment, costs of equipment, and so on. And so you had a lot of what we called, and farmers know about this, fence lines, right? So fence lines are windbreaks. And so they were acting as windbreaks, not necessarily intentionally, but because of cultural practices at the time. So as we move forward and we create larger fields because of available equipment, efficiency of equipment, turning radius, and so on, all kinds of reasons, then we lose windbreaks because we're removing those fence rows and making the field bigger. There was definitely a big push in the 80s and 90s of establishing windbreaks, and that's the ones we see now were really established at that time. That question really speaks to the design of a windbreak. So someone would say, "Oh, I'll plant my trees 10 feet wide." Well, if you do that and you don't plant shrubs with it, then you're going to be waiting, 10 to 15 years before they become effective. So in the design of that, you're planting them a meter by a meter, and they'll become effective right away, minimally, but they will constantly increase in their effectiveness. In addition to that, there's nothing wrong with putting in an artificial snow fence where the natural windbreak will happen as well, to cover an interim period. So if you're really serious about windbreaks, you can have an effective windbreak right away, and its effectiveness will increase as it grows and as you manage it.